Joining me now for the Beat interview is Preet Bharara, out with a new book today, Doing Justice, a prosecutor's thoughts on crime, punishment, and the rule of law. Bharara is the former U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York. We last spoke on air in 2015 while he was in that post, and today is his first time back on MSNBC since that interview. And a lot has happened since then. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me. That was quite a nostalgia trip. Walk down memory lane. Thanks for the memory.
Anything jump out to you?
You know, how young I looked.
What was the hardest case you indicted as the top prosecutor for New York, and the hardest case you didn't indict?
One of the hardest things to do is to walk away from a case. At the end of the day, it shouldn't be that hard to make a decision to go forward or not, because you either have the evidence or you don't. Some cases are hard in terms of how much labor it takes. Some of the public corruption cases took a lot of folks working around the clock for a long period of time to make sure that they got the job done.
Let's talk public corruption.
Sure.
I'm going to show folks some of the evidence you guys had. Video of actual people meeting and taking bribes. This is surveillance video of cash bribes that were in manila envelopes, secret handoffs, hotel rooms. This was hot stuff, and you upset a lot of Democrats with those cases.
Yeah, it's an apolitical office, and as people think about the SDNY now, that it's much in the news because they're overseeing the Cohen investigation and prosecution. The people there, we don't know what their political affiliations are. They don't care about political affiliations. We prosecuted a lot of Democrats. We prosecuted people who were powerful, people who were not powerful. It didn't matter.
That could surprise some people who look at you now as a big hero to some in the resistance.
Yeah, I don't consider myself to be a member of the resistance. What I do consider myself to be is now a private citizen, and I have a voice, and I express myself, and I have some things to say about the President of the United States, because I think he's doing things to undermine the rule of law, and I think he's doing things that undermines people's faith in various institutions, like a lot of former government officials are doing, both Democrat and Republican, I might say.
You mentioned the president. That is how many people know you. And you really stood up to him in a way that others have struggled to. Let's look here, for those who may not recall, your journey through this Trump era. Take a look.
U.S. Attorney Preet Bharara has been fired by the Trump administration after refusing to resign.
One of the most prominent from the Southern District of New York, Preet Bharara, has just tweeted that he did not resign. He was fired.
Preet Bharara, who was just fired as the federal prosecutor in New York.
Bharara was among 46 federal prosecutors fired by the White House.
What did you learn in that experience, and what concerns you about the president's approach to the rule of law?
Well, I don't know how much people remember, but it was an unusual thing for me to be asked to stay. I didn't expect to be asked to stay for another term, but I was in a personal meeting with the president, even before he had decided who was going to be a Secretary of State, and I think maybe even Secretary of Defense, but I'm not sure. So it was a great honor, in a sense, that you had the next leader of the United States of America deciding who he wanted to have in this position as the local U.S. Attorney in New York. Then he proceeded to call me.
Well, before we get to the calls, you say it was a great honor. I want to get into this because, as I mentioned in the intro, I've interviewed you before. I, like many lawyers, think of you as this pretty incredible prosecutor. So in that spirit, I want to dig into that evolution. You're talking about this November 30th meeting. No president asked people to come during the transition and stay on. Let's look at
or even after. I never met with President Obama. He never called me.
And Obama was the one who put you in this powerful post. Let's look back. I think it's useful at what you said that day in the Trump Tower lobby.
I'm enjoying all these clips.
The president-elect asked, presumably because he's a New Yorker and is aware of the great work that our office has done over the past 7 years, asked to meet with me to discuss whether or not I'd be prepared to stay on as the United States Attorney. We had a good meeting. I said I would absolutely consider staying on. I agreed to stay on.
Did you know, coming down from that meeting, why he was so interested at the time in New York prosecutors?
No, and I can't say for a fact that I know now. I mean, I have some suspicions, and I can conjecture. I only make allegations based on firm evidence, but common sense is an important part of the thinking process.
I appreciate your rigor. So this is so fascinating. Walk us through how you go from that lobby to his phone calls to the concern, as you say, not proof, but the concern that he was inappropriately reaching out to this office.
So in the meeting, it was, we shook hands. He looked me in the eye. He talked about the great work of the office. I made clear that we're an independent office. We're not political. I literally said that. I made a point to say that in the meeting. And there was nothing especially peculiar and unusual in the meeting other than the fact that he asked me for my phone numbers, which I thought was kind of odd because someone must have had them, because that's how I got there. You know, there's an assistant, Rona Graff, who now people maybe know her name because it's been mentioned. And then I left the meeting, and then a couple of weeks later, the president-elect called me, though I would have expected him to be very busy. He shot the breeze with me for 5 minutes. I reported that contact to my deputy and some members of my staff, and also to the Trump transition team that was responsible for DOJ. Then he called me again 2 days before the inauguration, when you would expect him to be very busy working on his speech. He didn't say anything untoward. He didn't ask me to do anything inappropriate. I returned the phone call because he was not yet the president, and I advised people about it.
And at that time, he was not calling, to our knowledge, any other prosecutor in the country.
I don't believe so. No one has come forward.
And so he was just calling SDNY.
He's calling me. And I didn't know him personally at all before I met him on November 30th. So it seemed odd to me. And I know people have suggested that Donald Trump doesn't know about protocols and he's new to all this. I know a lot more about his habits with contacting people and going sort of around, proper protocols than we knew back then. But as I've often joked, my father is a retired immigrant Indian-American pediatrician from New Jersey and has not read the DOJ guidelines and not familiar with Justice Department protocols. And he said to me, I don't like that he's calling you.
He had a feeling.
He had a feeling because it's odd. Why is he calling? I wasn't flattered by it. I thought it was odd. This is before we knew all about executive time, and there's plenty of opportunities to make phone calls. But that was still all well and good. And then the president was inaugurated. He took office, and now he's the actual president of the United States. And then almost exactly 2 years ago, on March 9th, he called. The White House secretary called and said, the president of the United States would like to speak with you. Could you return the call? Now I thought it was different. Now we actually have a Senate-confirmed Attorney General, Jeff Sessions, through whom the call would have expected to be made if it was going to be an innocuous call. There was no heads up about it. There was no indication of what the topic would be. You started to worry about things that were going on in the world. There had been calls from various sectors to investigate things like the emoluments clause and other things. I obviously have jurisdiction, that office has jurisdiction over various aspects of Donald Trump's life, including his business, Trump Organization, the Trump Foundation, various properties, etc. And now for him to be calling, not with my not knowing what it was about, when there are these protocols in place that say you cannot discuss an enforcement matter, the White House can't discuss it with anyone other than the Attorney General and maybe the Deputy Attorney General. I didn't like it.
Were you concerned he could have an illicit motive regarding investigations that touched on his world?
I was, either in that call or some future call, but I was mostly concerned at the appearance of it, especially since the president himself had gotten elected in part by going at rally after rally, complaining about this informal meeting between Bill Clinton and Loretta Lynch on the tarmac. Remember that? And nobody knows what was said there. And the president himself, Donald Trump himself, said they must have been having an illicit conversation. It must have been about the Hillary Clinton investigation, and that was wrong.
So you're raising such an important point here, which is that while there are critiques of Donald Trump that allege that he is not that informed or not that good at this, your concern was that he might be very informed and trying to cultivate you or involve you in something that you viewed as potentially improper.
Yeah, I have come to that conclusion over time in the months since, but in that moment, we actually considered, and it sounds not as crazy as it did back then, because now we know about Michael Cohen recording the president and Omarosa recording the president. We considered, and we have this competing.
You considered what?
Taping the president in that phone call.
You considered recording the president if you had called him back?
Yeah, because I wanted to make sure, because I had a certain amount of mistrust, it was an odd phone call to be making. It would be my word against him if he decided to say something inappropriate, which I didn't necessarily know was going to happen.
I mean, this isn't in the book. This is pretty interesting.
Yeah, that's why this whole debate about whether Rod Rosenstein was joking when he said, I'll wire up against the president or not, sort of rung in my ear a little bit. And I tend to believe that he was not joking, because there has been a certain kind of conduct that happens, and when you're used to seeing someone, tell untruths about what happens in a conversation, and you care about your own integrity. I didn't want anybody to say, you had some side conversation with the President of the United States. So we didn't do that ultimately. We thought that was a bridge too far. We talked about it for 5 minutes.
On that point, you and your deputy June Kim and other sort of nonpartisan prosecutor experts viewed that as a potentially acceptable way to guard against an improper contact had you gone forward with the call. Would you need legal authority to do that?
Well, you put a lot of qualifiers in there. It's something we discussed and talked about, did not think it was appropriate, did not think it was the right thing to do.
But when Rod
so
Rosenstein discussed that in a meeting, your point is that is the kind of thing that you think prosecutors can legitimately discuss?
I think as a general matter, so long as it doesn't violate some law, and in New York it wouldn't violate a law, if you have a concern, and we all know people like this, a concern that someone will not be truthful about the conversation later, or you want to protect both the integrity of your own reputation and another person's reputation, there are a number of things that you do. You know this, you're a practicing lawyer. You either take contemporaneous notes, as we know that virtually everyone who's dealt with the president does, or you think about a recording. I want to make clear, we talked about it for 3 or 4 minutes and then said, that's crazy, I'm not going to record the President of the United States. And we decided not to call.
Did you have anyone check the legal authority for it?
We discussed it among ourselves and thought it's not a proper thing to do, so we didn't. I think the interesting part of it was that was an impulse that we had, and ultimately decided the best thing to do is not to return the call until we know what it's about. And I returned the call of the secretary and said, oh, by the way, I did that after also consulting with Jeff Sessions' chief of staff, and said, you agree with me, do you not, that it's odd and inappropriate for me to have a direct conversation with the president?
And that's important. We can corroborate that because, as you well know, and the viewers may recall, the emails about your effort to check in with your own bosses at Trump DOJ corroborate this. Did you get any guidance back that you thought was helpful or valid from them?
Yeah, they were in total agreement.
So Trump's own appointed DOJ folks said, yeah, don't call the president.
Yeah, until you know what it's about and until we can figure out whether it's proper or not. And again, by the way, this was not just for my protection. This is for the protection of the president, too, because if he was going to be making an innocuous phone call at the time, I didn't have reason to think that there was a 100% chance he was going to be saying something inappropriate. I now have a different view of that over time. But it was for his protection also. And that I think the department, his own appointed people, realized this is not going to look good for the president. If it looks like the president was reaching out, as now we know he has done on other occasions by telling Jim Comey once in a private conversation to lay off of Michael Flynn, conversations he apparently had more recently with the acting Attorney General, Matt Whitaker, about getting my successor to unrecuse himself from the Michael Cohen case. These are the kinds of conversations that have happened since, and reporting that's happened since, that make me more comfortable with the decision I made not to return the call.
Do you think there is strong evidence of the elements of obstruction on behalf of the president at this point in the public record?
The way you asked that question, I would say, yeah, I think there's strong evidence based on the circumstances that I'm aware of, but I don't know everything that Bob Mueller knows, and I don't know what other arguments have been made, and I haven't looked closely at the law as it relates to the particular things that they've found. But yeah, I think there's good evidence, yeah.
If defendants like Roger Stone or Rick Gates were, say, poor minorities charged in New York, where would they await trial?
Well, depending on the circumstances, depending what they could put up, they might be incarcerated pending trial.
And a lot of poor people are, and in New York, a lot of them are at Rikers. You describe this in your book as a broken hellhole, beset by violence, violating the rights of people who are just presumed innocent awaiting their trial. But more importantly, you're not someone who's just criticizing this. You've been working on this for some time. And I want to revisit the conversation we had several years ago discussing Rikers.
Some of the most vulnerable people in society, you mentioned them, are young people, 16, 17, 18 years old, who are thrown into Rikers Island. And as we demonstrate in the report that we issued and further in the lawsuit that we brought against the city, some of them are treated very, very, very harshly and very poorly.
As a prosecutor who puts away bad guys, why was that important to you? And is Rikers getting any better?
So those are both good questions. I've come to believe that if you believe in a just and fair society, and I talk about what I think justice means and fairness means in the book called Doing Justice, that the prosecutor must care about the prisoner in the same way that the rich must care about the poor and the healthy must care about the sick, if that's the kind of world we want to live in. And I think it can be the case that you forget that the prosecutor's job doesn't necessarily end at the time of sentencing. And the thing that I'm among the most proud of accomplishments of my office was bringing these lawsuits against the city and the Department of Corrections because Rikers Island was mistreating adolescents at an alarming rate, was using violence at an alarming rate.
I think it's so important, and it's such a big part of your record, which people may miss, and yet it's such an important area for reform. We should note in some areas the Rikers violence rate's risen by about 9%. It seems to be an intractable problem. Is there anything real concrete they should do right now?
So there's been a movement to consider shutting it down and starting fresh in it with a new culture.
But you're saying it may be time for New York's leaders to consider closing Rikers.
Yeah, and I think people are discussing it.
You talk so much in the book about the import of judgment and being careful and being restrained, and given the great powers you wielded. But then in a medium that the president uses and where you are read more widely than perhaps a nonfiction book, we'll look at some of the tweets, which certainly kick around, telling the president,
oh, no,
you have the right to remain silent, invoking the powers you once wielded that would be used against a criminal defendant, and he's not been charged with anything. You yelled at him in all caps, get off my lawn,
yes, but in response
to make fun of his all caps.
What was his all caps?
You see it right there. The rigged, corrupt media
okay.
as the enemy of the people, and you replied, get off my lawn, and here's one more. Why do people think he keeps his promises? Hashtag summa cum liar, also about the president. Why use that voice there when you stress care and consideration in these other mediums?
Because I'm a private citizen, and because it's Twitter. And you know, I had the first Twitter account of any United States attorney in the country. And go back and look at the Twitter account when I was the U.S. attorney, and I had a public office, and I had a responsibility, and I had taken an oath to uphold the Constitution, and I was a public figure. Every single tweet was vetted by multiple people. They didn't go off in a barrage on Sunday morning during executive time. And I was very careful about it. On Twitter, you can have some fun if you're a private citizen. The idea of comparing the ludicrous, nonsense-filled, rapid-fire, obnoxious, ethically challenged tweets that this president, the sitting president of the United States, who oversees all the ethical structure, all the Department of Justice, all the rule of law apparati, if that's a plural of apparatus, in the world, is an interesting comparison. So I think every once in a while, I've said this on my podcast, stay tuned, time and time again, we have this constant conversation with people who are on Twitter. Is it a good forum? Is it a bad forum? And I think there are a lot of good things that can happen on Twitter. From time to time, you can get carried away. I don't think any of those. I don't.
You
think any of those,
I stand by those tweets. Do you think the president's tweets are an embarrassment to the country?
Yes.
Yeah. Let me play one of your rock heroes. You know, we do a little music around here. Okay. This is a good shout out. I'm just going to say, anyone. If Mike Pence,
this might be my favorite thing.
If Mike Pence got this shout out, I would report it and be happy for him. I'm happy for you. Bruce Springsteen at a show on Preet. That begins our lightning round.
Can we play that a few more times?
Favorite Bruce Springsteen song?
Thunder Road.
Best venue to see Bruce at live?
There, Stamford, Connecticut.
Best Bruce lyric that applies to life or law?
Ooh, poor king ain't satisfied till he rules everything. How about that? It's not bad.
That's really solid. This is why you watch. Preet Bharara. We're going to do now lightning round in one word.
Oh, God.
Or as close to one word as you can describe your old boss, Eric Holder.
Committed.
Your old boss, Loretta Lynch.
Dedicated.
Your predecessor, Rudy Giuliani.
Changed.
Your old boss, Chuck Schumer.
Hardest working man in show business.
Your deputy from that same SDNY office, June Kim.
Great man. These are not hard.
Robert Mueller.
I'm trying to think of the right words. I have a lot of words for Robert Mueller. Hero.
Andrew Cuomo.
Pass.
We don't do passes in the lightning round, Preet.
He's the governor.
President Donald Trump.
He's the president.
And our last question is our most ridiculous, but it does come from our research of you. Your son, according to you, after looking at some of your tweets, said, "Daddy, your rapper name is just Ice." Why?
Somebody had tweeted, Preet, what's your rapper name? And I thought it would be an interesting thing to discuss with the fans. Some people got upset, like, why are you tweeting from the dinner table? But I was trying to interest my teenage children in a conversation with their boring father. So this might be an interesting thing to talk about. And we came up with various names that they're not very good. And my son looks up and he says, Just Ice, which is a play on justice, which is also in the title of my book.
And the book
Doing Just Ice.
Doing Just Ice.
Just Ice.
I didn't know I was misreading the book this whole time.
It's Doing Just Ice.
I'm so embarrassed.
Which is a form of drug intake, apparently.
The book is Doing Just Ice, or Doing Justice, a prosecutor's thoughts on crime, punishment, and the rule of law. It comes out today. Thank you for coming here, Preet.
Sorry.
Appreciate it. Hey, I'm Ari Melber from MSNBC. You can see more of our videos right here, or better yet, subscribe to our YouTube channel below. You could have been anywhere in the world, but you're here with us, and we appreciate that.